presentation of Dialogue on Idaho Public Television is made possible through the generous support of the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, committed to fulfilling the Moore and Bettis family legacy of building the great state of Idaho. By the Friends of Idaho Public Television and by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
And I just remember sitting there thinking, this could be where it all ends.
Coming up, a conversation with the creators of the blockbuster HBO series Game of Thrones. You'll learn about their journey from being two writers with virtually no experience in television to running one of the most popular TV shows in history. That's Dialogue next. Stay tuned. Hello and welcome to Dialogue. I'm Marcia Franklin. If you haven't heard of Game of Thrones, the award-winning HBO series, you just might be one of the few in our country who hasn't. An estimated 23 million people in the United States now watch each episode, either on TV, online, or on DVD. The series, which will ultimately span 8 seasons, is an adaptation of the best-selling fantasy novels by George R.R. Martin. Set on 2 fictional continents, it depicts the brutal battles between different family dynasties for the Iron Throne of the 7 Kingdoms. It's been both lauded for its storylines, acting, and special effects, and criticized for what some view as its gratuitous violence. The 2 lead writers and showrunners of the series, David Benioff and Weiss, would be the first to say they had no idea what they were getting into when they pitched the idea to HBO more than 10 years ago. But they felt compelled to try, and their risk has paid off. The series now has more primetime Emmys than any other scripted show in television history. I sat down with the 2 at the 2016 Sun Valley Writers Conference to learn more about what inspires them, as well as how they respond to critics. Well, first of all, welcome to Idaho. It's great to have you here.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you.
And you know, David, we're not that far. I looked on a map. It's a straight shot to Moose, Wyoming.
That's right.
And I understand you were a DJ there.
I was. KMTN.
Okay, I wondered if it was K-Hole, because those are the greatest letters, station
K-hole.
call letters. Wasn't K-Hole though, right?
It wasn't K-Hole. I was a little worried about working for a place called K-Hole. It was KMTN, The Mountain.
Those are other good calls.
Is that how you say it?
Yeah. Well, I tried to go as deep as possible.
So that's where the character The Mountain comes from,
KMTN,
right?
The Mountain. Yes. Well, that and George Martin.
He's from Wyoming.
But I did the graveyard shift from midnight till 6 in the morning.
And so it inspired some of the very frigid scenes in Game of Thrones. your time in Moose, Wyoming.
I guess so, and City of Thieves. I guess, there's something about snow, ice.
Snow and ice.
There's something appealing about it. We like going to Iceland, too. It's a fun country to work in, so we always try to come up with some more scenes set on glaciers or frozen lakes.
Does it seem a long time ago since the 2 of you met? It would be 21 years since Ireland, when you met together.
I had a lot less gray in my beard.
Yeah. I can't say that we had this in mind when we were drinking Guinness in the various pubs of Dublin.
Well, it's an incredible adventure.
Yeah, it really has been. It's kind of calm. It started in Dublin, and it brought us back to 90 minutes up the road to Belfast. So it's a definite Irish theme in there.
Two Jewish guys in Ireland getting together.
Yeah, that was the strange thing. Everyone would always ask us, one of your parents from Ireland or grandparents or something, and we were probably the only Yanks there who had no Irish connection whatsoever. Almost most Americans seem to have somebody in their family from there. Nothing for us.
Something like 45% have at least like one grandparent that has.
Well, I was thinking about the trajectory and also about the fact that you wrote a thesis on Beckett, and I was wondering what Beckett would think about all of this transformation and change in your life. I did find one quote that might summarize it a bit. You both have admitted that you went into this with very little experience, and there's a great quote from Worsted Ho where he says, "Try again, fail again, fail better."
Yeah,
you have that up in your house, don't you?
Yeah, that's hanging in my office, and we pretty much used it, slightly askew version of it.
We ripped it off
for the first episode.
Davos, right?
Davos says it to John.
Jon Snow after he gets resurrected.
And Jon Snow also says there's no shame in fear. My father told me what matters is how we face it. So I imagine in this whole timeline, there have been some failures and fears.
There definitely were.
A lot of both. Still a lot of fear. We went into it with no experience in television whatsoever, and made a tremendous number of mistakes for the first year. I mean, still make mistakes every year, but I think, but hopefully learning as we go and improving things. But we just didn't have any production experience, so we came in kind of knowing how we wanted to write it, but not knowing anything about the casting process, the editing process, working with visual effects, working with a production designer, all that stuff that you need to know. And it's been a steep learning curve. I'm thankful that we got a chance to do it, because it very easily could have gone the other way when we started. And
I remember being in Malta when we were shooting the first season, and it was in this sort of crucible period where it really looked like everything could go badly. They weren't going to give us any more money because we already spent quite a bit, and the weather was terrible, and we was in this RV that was getting blown back and forth by these massive hurricane gusts of wind. I just remember sitting there thinking, this could be where it all ends. But luckily the clouds cleared and we got what we needed.
I think our producer at the time said this week will be our Waterloo. It's unclear at this point whether we're Wellington or Napoleon.
It really
Ignorance.
was. Yeah, it really was. Just if we had known what we would have to know to do this well, I think the intimidation factor may have gotten the best of us, but we were just filled with excitement over the prospect. We knew that done right, George's books could really be something tremendous, and we were so excited. We just kind of barreled into this situation without really knowing what we didn't know. They were unknown unknowns.
And that is key, isn't it? You picked up these books, or you were sent the books by Martin's agent. You read 1,000 pages, as I understand. Whether that's apocryphal or not, I'm going to believe that it's true. That you read 1,000 pages in a night.
I think it was 2 days.
Two days.
Yeah.
Something about those books just went inside you, just grabbed you.
I think you said they're like crack on paper, and there's something addictive.
I've never actually smoked crack, so it's kind of don't know what I'm talking about. But what I imagine crack to be like.
I don't read as fast as Dan does, but I remember just being in my bed at home reading these books endlessly, and my wife just not understand, just being like, "Are you kidding me? You're still reading these books about dragons and ice demons? What's wrong with you?"
I've heard you say that you were attracted to the fact that there are real people in his stories living in a world of magic.
Yeah, that's what felt so groundbreaking about it. I mean, there are certain well-established fantasy tropes in the book that we've seen before. The dragons and giants and demons and magic, but the characters felt like real people who just happened to live in a world where these supernatural things existed, and there's something about, I don't think there's any way I could have stuck with that many thousands of pages. I know there's no way, if I hadn't fallen in love with the characters, because that's ultimately what compels me about any good story, is that I become, whether or not they're good people, it's not necessarily loving them in the way that you love a friend, but finding them incredibly compelling and just wanting to know what's going to happen to them. I mean, that's sort of the key to any good writing, I think. And with George's books, it was falling in love with these characters and then watching in horror as he killed them all.
And now he gets to watch in horror as you kill him off.
Yeah, we're killing him even quicker than he did.
Because you're past.
Yeah.
We actually have to pay our characters, and he doesn't, so it's a different situation.
Yeah.
Well, we'll talk about that
Okay.
in a moment, but as you say, there's lots of shades of gray in the characters. It's not just good versus evil. You've got
There
good
are
people.
50 shades of gray.
Yeah, I was going to say, not 50 Shades of Gray, but although there is the criticism, of course, that there is.
I don't know, if I hadn't said that, would we never have segued into this question?
We'll never know,
Oh,
will we? But yes, there's a criticism. I learned a new word researching.
Sexposition.
Sexposition.
Yeah, I like that word.
There's been a criticism that to move exposition along and long monologues, you have gratuitous sex scenes going on in the background.
Who said that?
Well,
we haven't done that in a long time. It's been seasons and seasons since we've done that.
People don't like it.
Yeah.
What am I going to say? I no real interest in defending it. It is what it is. People.
It's one of the. It is one of those things that for every person who criticizes something vocally, for all you know, there are 10 people who really enjoyed it, but it's, for whatever reason, they're not putting their voices out there. So you can't, if you start listening to every criticism, it'll tear what you do apart, because the criticisms are, many of them, mutually exclusive. There are going to be people who think it's moving too quickly. There are going to be people who think it's moving too slowly. People who think there's too much violence. People who think there's not enough violence. And we make the show that we want to watch. We would want to watch if we were reviewers. So some people are going to like it, and some people aren't.
And you don't read anymore what people say online.
No, I mean, when sometimes if there's a huge hubbub or it becomes like a front page story, which has happened, it's almost impossible to avoid, or well-meaning friends will send you, say, oh my God, did you see this? And you think it's going to be something great, and you hit a link and it says, something really
Senator
horrible.
Clara McCaskill says she's never going to watch your show again because she is upset by the number of rapes in it.
Right.
And that was a very strong thread in the news for a while.
We've somehow survived Senator McCaskill's defection.
Yes.
So, I just fundamentally disagree. I think the idea that depicting a brutal crime indicates endorsement of that crime is ridiculous. And so that's all I'm going to say. I disagree.
It's arguable that the sanitizing representations of violence is more harmful than more graphic depictions of violence that make you feel the way violence probably should make you feel, which is uncomfortable and horrified. And we tried not to put it in a cartoony place, because that's not what the books did. That's not what history is about, and it just seems fundamentally dishonest to us to have violence depicted that way, in a more stylized, less gritty way.
Yeah, I honestly, I feel like it's an absurd criticism. I think you go back to any book that I find is memorable that deals with violent subjects, and the graphic scenes in Dante's Inferno, the graphic scenes in the Bible, they're not on screen. Obviously, there have been screened adaptations, but just because they're not on screen doesn't mean that they're not describing unbelievable atrocities. And this is a very violent world that George depicts in his world, and it felt fundamentally dishonest to us, as Dan said, to approach it without being honest to that. And that was part of our initial pitch to HBO. This is not Tolkien in a kind of sexless world where, as far as we know, the hobbits have never once contemplated anything erotic. It's just not this world. And this is a world where it's not humans against orcs, it's humans against humans, and doing horrible things to each other. And that's the story. And I totally understand that some people aren't going to want to watch that story, and that the violence level is too much for them, or the sexual level is too much. But luckily we live in a world now where there's something like 460 scripted series on air every year, and there's a great variety of choice for people. So nobody's forced to watch it, and there are people in my family who don't like the level of violence and don't want to watch, and that's absolutely fine.
When you do meet somebody, well, let's just say it's your grandmother, I don't know if she's still around, but if you were to describe this series to your grandmom, what would you tell her it's about?
See, my grandmother, neither of my grandmothers are with us any longer, unfortunately. One of my grandmothers would have loved this show because she read. It was her bookshelf that had all the steamy books on it that I would sneak off the bookshelf and look for the naughty bits when I was 10 years old. I guess I would tell her it was more like she was a big fan of the James Clavell books, and I would tell her it's a lot more like a James Clavell book with bits of magic around the edges than those fantasy books that maybe she'd seen at the bookstore and walked past on the way to the James Clavell books.
Yeah, my grandmothers are not around anymore. I did make the mistake of watching one episode with my mom, and it was Joffrey, the evil prince, is doing something horrible to a prostitute, and I would say, that was a definite mistake. But she loves the show, and I think obviously she's a biased woman, but it's been fun to see people like our 4 parents, who are all in their 70s, right? And who you wouldn't think of as fans of this kind of thing, really becoming obsessed with it and getting text from my mother with "OMG!" 3 exclamation points after some big surprising scene. It's like, Mom, it's when you start texting like a 12-year-old.
Yeah.
Season 6 has gotten so many accolades and amazing performances by very strong women. And there's also been the question of whether you did respond to any kind of criticism about.
No, I mean, when we were plotting season 5, we've been talking about the end game and the end point for years, ever since we started. So all for Sansa is just one example, where she was headed, or where Cersei was headed. These were all things that we had discussed at length before writing or shooting season 5. Season 5 was the trajectories of the characters through this previous season were already aimed at the current season. So it wasn't in any way a response to we don't. It's not writing with a committee of 2 people or 4 people is something you can do. Writing with a committee of 1 million people who you poll for every decision online is, to my knowledge, nothing good has ever been done that way. So we really that's not how we work.
The easiest way to look at it is we finished our outline for season 6 in early February.
Yeah.
And the show didn't air, season 5 didn't air until April of that year. So all of season 6 was mapped out in incredible detail, and we didn't go back and make changes because of criticism for it. As Dan said, everything where Sansa was going, it just wouldn't work. I mean, I think the reason this season worked for a lot of people is that things kind of clicked into place that had been set up for a long, long time, for many seasons, and it just doesn't work if every year we started fresh and thought, okay, now where are these characters going to go this year? It has to be. It's the kind of story that just needs a long-term plan.
And you guys, know where you're going. I mean, you're writing or have written.
We know where we're
the
going.
end by now.
We haven't written it.
Close
We've
to it.
talked it over a million times, and I mean, we could write it. We know enough about it now that we could write the final episode today if we had to, and so we know where we're heading, which is. Again, I can't start a book if I don't know where it's going to end, and it's very hard to work on something this big if you don't have a sense of direction.
One of the things I found interesting, I really enjoyed your book. We have it here, City of Thieves, and as I thought about Game of Thrones, coming at it as a newbie, and trying to understand it, it seemed a lot like a big game of human chess, which I never really understood chess that well. My brothers are really good at it, so I'd watch them, but the queen obviously is a powerful piece. And chess figures in City of Thieves as well.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if that, some of the plotting does remind you as well of a great big human game of chess.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I also am not a good chess player, but I grew up with an obsessive chess-playing father who's got, all his bookshelves are filled with chess books. And
I saw when I took my son to New York and we stayed with David's parents, and he has thousands of chess books.
It's another language.
It is another language, which I've never really learned to speak, but I've always been fascinated more as an abstraction than the actual game. I mean, Dan's 8-year-old son could beat me. That's not even an exaggeration.
He's pretty good, yeah.
He's beaten Peter Dinklage. We have the photographic evidence of it. So, but yeah, it's very much, and I think that comes from George's books, the sense of characters trying to play each other, and there's a very specific reason he chose the title Game of Thrones. And that's why, even though it's not the title of his entire series, it's just the title of the first book, we thought it was the best descriptor of the entire show. And so that's why we chose Game of Thrones for the series title, as opposed to, I guess, The Song of Ice and Fire.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that interests me from a meta perspective is this concept of all of us having both male and female in ourselves. You have men that have very highly developed feminine sides in them, and you have women that, and I'm talking now in a classic sense, or what we think of traditionally, and women who have highly developed masculine sides. That there's not one or the other, which is.
Yeah, even on the anatomical level, you look at the number of eunuchs in the show, and that's
a very eunuch-heavy show.
Yeah.
I think we must have more eunuchs than any
Guinness
show.
Book of
I mean,
World
there are
Records,
literally
most eunuchs.
thousands of eunuchs in the show.
Yeah.
So. I think we win there.
I won't ask you about the casting call for that. But I guess I just did. One question we had from a viewer is, what's the secret to keeping audiences tuned into a show where fan favorite characters can die at any time?
It's had a lot of characters. As long as you have enough characters left that they like, one or two go missing.
Yeah, if they all died, it would be a problem.
Rebirth?
Yeah, that helps.
Make the show a lot easier to produce.
Yeah. I mean, it's a tough question. It gets to the heart of, I think it goes back to the books also. It's first of all, as Dan said, there are many characters. So it's not just, the first season Ned dies, but there's still a great number of characters that we love. The Red Wedding removes 4 or 5 characters that have become beloved from the board, but we still have Arya, we still have Jon Snow for a while. And yeah, that definitely helps. And I think just ultimately you just want to see what's going to happen. And there's a kind of a craving to know. And so you get that in all these spoiler sites out there, or people like sneaking around near the set with these cameras trying to get pictures of the characters in costume so they can post it online and spoil it for everybody, which I don't get. Like that's the one thing. The criticism I get, might not agree with it, but I get it. The spoiler thing, I just don't get. To me, it's like, not only is it like looking at the last page of a book and learning what happened, but it's then ripping out that page and putting it on the library wall so that you can ruin it for everybody. So those are the people I don't like.
How do you keep everything so secret once you have written something?
It's difficult.
Really hard. Yeah.
You have to be real. I mean, we talked to our friend Ryan Johnson, who's just finished shooting a Star Wars movie, and we've talked to him about the way that they do a very good job of keeping everything on double secret lockdown. And as we go on, especially as we come to the end of the run of the show, the thirst of people to find out what's going to happen seems to grow, which makes our job in terms of keeping the scripts on lockdown a lot harder. We've taken a lot of precautions.
Going back to this issue of never having done this before, and being afraid and everything, how do you handle that? How do you plow ahead?
The fear part?
Yeah. Work with people who are really, really talented, who help you.
That's a huge part of it. I mean, one thing we were talking about here last night was that the television is a team sport, as opposed to writing a novel, which is a solitary endeavor. In television, we have our jobs, but there are hundreds of people around us who are very, very good at what they do and who work incredibly hard, and they take a massive amount of the workload off. And
I think we have a mutual friend, Malcolm Spellman, who's a writer-producer on the show Empire, and I think the way he put it, I thought was really smart. And he said, don't be afraid of what you don't know. And so if you're afraid of your ignorance and you try to hide the fact that you don't know something and pretend like you do, then you're never actually going to ask the people around you who do know the questions that you need to ask to learn about, at least some small piece of what their lifetime of experience has taught them.
How do you two work? What's the division of labor there?
For writing?
Yeah.
For writing, so once we have an outline, we'll divvy up the scripts. It's the two of us, and we have 2 other writers, Brian Cogman and Dave Hill. And once we figure out which scripts we're writing, Dave and Brian will write their own script individually, and then we'll take the others, and Dan might write the first half, and I'll be writing the second half, and then we swap paths and rewrite each other. And we've been friends for 20 years, so there's a shorthand, and there's also a kind of, I think there's less of a fear of offending. If Dan writes a line of dialogue that I think isn't working, I'll just write a note saying, I don't think this works, and it's not.
It's just a lot. It's one of those. Also, the way that we have to write the show, which is under relatively serious time pressures. If you write 60 pages in very short order, it takes a certain kind of hubris that I just don't think we have to decide that those scenes that you cranked out really, really quickly are perfect and should not be tampered with in any way. They're not perfect ever. So.
Is it freeing now to be ahead of the book, or is that another anxiety area?
It's freeing and terrifying in equal measure.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was always a kind of a comfort in knowing, even say season 5, where we had already deviated significantly from the books. We had certain set pieces from George's novels that we knew we were heading towards, and you know, whether it was the Walk of Atonement or something else. That's the first one that comes to mind. Season 6 is the first time where, aside from a couple of scenes on the Iron Islands, it's pretty much entirely original. I don't know if original is the right word, because it's still an adaptation, obviously. It's still George's characters, but it's none of those scenes take place in the books, at least yet. So that's nerve-wracking, but also, yeah, also liberating. I mean, it's just different writing a scene. If you're taking a scene from a book and trying to figure out how to make it work, you're exercising different muscles in your brain than if you're inventing a scene whole cloth. And I'm mixing metaphors terribly here, but regardless, it was fun. I think it was the most fun season to write.
We'll sew it all up in the end.
Yeah. Nice.
But yeah, no, I can imagine it would be both. I mean, you know, you want to remain true to this person that has inspired you so greatly. At the same time, you've got to get going. You know, like piles of money are burning every minute.
Yeah, I mean, with a ship is not gonna. It's a very big ship, and it's not gonna stop. So when we knew that going into it, we just, the one thing we didn't know going into it was that we would still be around 6 seasons in, because we didn't know that going into it that we were going to be around for a second season. You know.
Yeah, I remember saying very early on, saying, what would happen if we caught up with George's books? Because he was working on the. He was working on the 5th, but we still felt like we had a lot of time.
I remember when we kind of did the math and we started counting, well, this is how long he takes, and this is how long.
We said, oh, if that happened, it's going to be like the 6th season, and if we make it to a 6th season, like, things are going to be pretty good, so, and then it happened.
Yeah.
But going past Martin's storyline doesn't seem to have hurt the show's popularity. In 2016, Game of Thrones picked up another 11 primetime Emmys, including the top nod to Benioff and Weiss for their writing. It now has more Emmys than any other scripted series on television. Now, the conversation was so interesting, we kept recording. In part 2, we talk about what they hope the legacy of the series will be and what's next for them. And of course, dragons. You'll want to check it out, but if you miss any of our programs, you can always stream them at video.idahoptv.org. For Dialogue, I'm Marcia Franklin. Thanks for tuning in.
Presentation of Dialogue on Idaho Public Television is made possible through the generous support of the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, committed to fulfilling the Moore and Bettis family legacy of building the great state of Idaho. By the Friends of Idaho Public Television and by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.